We're waiting for the stream to fire up across the internet, and it looks like we are now live on Facebook. We're live on Periscope. We're live on YouTube. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney here at the R&R Law Group. We're a firm in Scottsdale where we help many good people facing criminal charges navigate through the criminal justice system. Over the course of many years, my team and I, we've helped literally thousands of good people. And over the course of our time practicing law, we've seen a lot of issues, a lot of problems, a lot of malfeasance, a lot of just general misconduct across the board, from police to prosecutors, to politicians, to judges, really to anybody and everybody who can touch the criminal justice system. There is some element that has done something wrong, and we have seen it. And so what we did is we created this show. It's called Watching the Watchers Live, so that we can monitor them. Oftentimes what we have seen is that the people who commit the problems, the people who are really responsible for the misconduct, somehow just sort of escape culpability for it. You or I would be charged with crimes. You or I would be disciplined. We would be put in prison or put in jail. But sometimes there are these different, sort of a different system of justice for those with power, for those who are part of that structure. And so what we want to make sure that we're doing here is holding them accountable. So what we do is we talk about those issues. Today, we have another one of those issues in the news. We're going to get into that. There was a new shooting in Philadelphia, and that is going to be on the agenda. So we've got some video footage. We've got some actual clips of it. We've got some clips of the aftermath. We've got some information from the Philadelphia Police Department and how they actually will analyze this. How do they process use of force situations? We actually have documents from the manual, so we'll go through some of that. We'll have some analysis. But before we do, we need to talk about the election, of course. We're right around the corner from this thing. Thank you. We're so tired of it, but we are just right around the corner. We've got 6 days until we are going to be right in the thick of it on November 3rd. And so we're grateful that you're here. If you are not a regular here and you're not a subscriber, do us a favor, hit the subscribe button, because we are going to be covering the election in depth, in particular on election night. I talked to Miss Faith, who's right back there, and we both agreed to do a mega live stream for the actual election night. So stick around, be a part of that, hit that subscribe button, and you can join in on the fun. So the way the format of this show works, we save the live chat until the end. We're going to go through some election type updates today. The big news yesterday, of course, was that Coney Barrett was confirmed and seated on the Supreme Court, which was, a big deal. We've been covering this at length on this channel, spent a lot of time going through the confirmation process. We talked a lot about her prior opinions, and now she is on the Supreme Court. Last night, she was actually confirmed by the U.S. Senate, 52-48 vote. She is the 115th Supreme Court justice to serve on the bench, and it was kind of a big deal, right? This is happening all just right within the very near proximity of the election. And this was a situation where she is replacing a judge who was a liberal judge. So we actually see the court now switching from a 5-4 conservative to liberal majority into a 6-3 conservative liberal majority. And so people are very upset about that. We've got some clips that we're going to go through today from Coney Barrett. She was at the White House yesterday. She got sworn in. She took her constitutional oath from Justice Thomas, and then she went over to the court and was sworn in under her oath to the court by Justice Roberts. And so she is now the 9th Supreme Court judge. And many people were sort of in disbelief that this happened, that the Democrats weren't able to do anything. But if you've been following this channel, we've covered it at length. Republicans had the vote. There is precedent for moving this quickly, and they got it done. So let's take a quick look at what Coney Barrett herself had to say last night at the White House.
My fellow Americans, even though we judges don't face elections, we still work for you. It is your Constitution that establishes the rule of law and the judicial independence that is so central to it. The oath that I have solemnly taken tonight means at its core that I will do my job without any fear or favor, and that I will do so independently of both the political branches and of my own preferences. I love the Constitution and the democratic republic that it establishes, and I will devote myself to preserving it. Thank you.
Cheers to ACB on that. I also love the Constitution, and I love the fact that she's talking about that, loving the fact that she's really going to, I think, from what we saw during her confirmation hearing, I think that I'm hopeful that she's going to be an originalist like she said she was going to be. I am perfectly ready and open to being just hurt and just, crushed over this thing, because I had this same feeling when we saw Justice Roberts get on the bench. We saw him go through his confirmation process, and he was very much like Amy Coney Barrett. He was very, very methodical, very sort of originalist, had amazing answers for everything, was basically the type of candidate that was essentially flawless, right? We talk about these people being born and raised to be on the Supreme Court. They've got a mental, acumen. They're outstanding in all aspects of life. No blemishes on their record, and they've worked for this stuff all their lives. And so we saw Justice Roberts go through, get appointed, and then we saw this slow sort of revision of his judicial philosophical underpinnings that was very disappointed. So while we're going to be happy that we have another originalist on the court, it is certainly something where I am fully prepared to be disappointed in a few years. We'll see if that happens. Now, as a quick reminder, this is what the court had looked like originally. We've talked about this a lot. It was Roberts, Alito, Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, and Thomas, who were going to be the conservative wing of the court. And then on the left, we had Ginsburg, who is a part of the liberal wing. Ginsburg is no longer with us anymore. May she rest in peace. And now this is how the court looks. So Justice Barrett is now on the court, and she is really doing a big job solidifying the right wing of the court. And so you have a lot of these justices who are very, very reliably conservative. Roberts is sort of the swing vote, but even if he does swing over to the left, it's still going to be a 5-4. And it's going to be, it's going to be hot coming up, because there are a lot of issues that are very, very pertinent right now. And we've covered it on this channel. We talked at length about what this is going to do to a lot of the cases that are pending, that are trying to go up to the Supreme Court or that have been close to the Supreme Court as they relate to the election. Specifically, we've seen in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania that some of these states have done their very best, in large part by lawsuits brought by the Democratic National Party or the Democratic local parties, in order to basically sue the election supervisors for these various states in order to modify the election rules. We spent a lot of time on this channel talking about it. They want to waive certain signature requirements. They want to extend the deadlines for when ballots can be counted and received. We've seen that they want to, sort of modify how postmarks are counted, whether it's, whether there's requirements that it's actually postmarked, and all sorts of issues, whether they use secret ballots and all this type of stuff. And so what we're seeing here is this is all coming up, literally up to the Supreme Court. We saw an opinion that we covered last week where Judge Roberts actually sided with the liberals. And so we had a 4-4 decision out of Pennsylvania. And now that is certainly going to be, reviewed now that we have an actual full court, now that we can't have even numbers anymore. There is no more 4-4s possible. So we have to have an actual answer on that we didn't have previously. Some of these issues we're talking about are right here: mail-in ballots, of course, Trump tax returns. We've got religious liberty, LGBTQ rights. We've got the Affordable Care Act. A lot of this stuff is, continuing to go on. We see here that this was part of the lawsuit that we had spoken about previously. Supreme Court of the United States, Republican Party versus Kathy Boockvar. Now, there's a number of different lawsuits that are all pending simultaneously, and this is something that is sort of being reappealed right now to the Supreme Court. So on our first day, lawyers for a Pennsylvania county, for Pennsylvania County, filed a petition with the Supreme Court asking Judge Barrett to recuse herself from an election-related case. So you can see here, respondent Luzerne County Board of Elections respectfully moves for the court for the recusal of Justice Amy Coney Barrett from this matter pursuant to Supreme Court Rule 21. Recusal is compelled because impartiality might be reasonably questioned. So they're citing the Supreme Court's rules, they're citing the U.S. Code, then they're citing the actual U.S. Constitution. The Due Process Clause of the Fifth Amendment and so on requires recusal under these same circumstances. And quite frankly, I don't think it does. I think that we have not seen any evidence that her impartiality might be questioned. We haven't seen any of that evidence. Now, people are just taking a look at this and saying, well, she's appointed by Donald Trump. She was, at the White House doing her acceptance and her oaths of office last night at the White House. So people are saying that was sort of in poor taste, that once she was confirmed, she should not have gone back to the White House and been a part of the whole Trump sort of show, right? That she was there, she was on the balcony, that she was giving a speech, and she was really sort of in close proximity. And many people in the legal realm were saying that's a little too much. She should have actually distanced herself from that point. Once the Senate said, "Yep, you're confirmed," 52 to 48, that's it. At that point, they're saying that she should have just sort of, poo-pooed the White House and moved on over and just become a judge at that point and not really engaged in any of that political theater, which it's a valid point. I think it's a matter of style rather than substance, but I don't think that the fact that she was a part of that over at the White House with the Trump administration, I don't think that alone is sufficient to say that she would not be partial, or that she would be impartial on these issues. And so I think what they're doing here is grasping. I don't think there's any basis for her to actually recuse herself. Now, if during the confirmation hearings, she would have answered those questions, if they would have asked her, hey, we know that these cases are coming up in front of the Supreme Court. We know that you're going to have to be a deciding vote on these issues about whether ballots can be extended, or deadlines can be extended, or we can waive notary requirements, or we can waive witness requirements for absentee ballots, or any of those issues. If she would have been substantive and answered those, well, then we know that she's impartial. And this motion, I think, would have been purely substantiated. But as it is right now, she didn't answer any of those questions. And the rationale, the reason she gave was, I'm going to hear these issues in front of the court. And she was exactly right. And from her record, I don't think there's anything that you can indicate that would indicate that she would be partial on these issues, just from the record. So I think it's a little bit of a stretch. I think the Supreme Court will take a look at this, and we may get some revisions on the rule. As a quick reminder, in Pennsylvania, the original ruling was that the Pennsylvania courts said that the extension was granted. So you could actually submit ballots theoretically after the election. It's possible to do that. So you could send them the day of the election, or mail your ballot in the day of the election, or theoretically mail it the day after the election. If it's not postmarked and it reaches the county recorder before the deadline, which I believe was 3 days later, then it would still count. So theoretically, what you could have is, on election night in Pennsylvania, you could have a Donald Trump win, and then 3 days later, when the actual deadline expires for the outstanding mail-in ballots, they would get all of those ballots in. If it was, say Trump wins by 10,000, 20,000 votes, they get 30,000 mail-in ballots that tend to go Democratic, then the election could literally change 3 days later. And all of these modifications are taking place in light of COVID, right? It's this panic that's happening that, we have to modify all these election rules at the last minute. And a lot of these have been brought by the Democratic Party. And so what this case, where it was before Amy Coney Barrett was on the court, was it went up, and the Supreme Court split 4-4, and it came back down and said, sure, we're not going to meddle with how the states want to conduct their own elections. And I think that's why Judge Roberts actually sided with the liberals, because he said if it's a 4-4, then the lower court ruling stands, and there's nothing that needs to be done. And so that's what had happened. Well, now the parties are reappealing it again, because we have a full court now, and now we're going to see what happens. If it's a 5-4 decision, then that prior grant of extending the deadline by 3 days is now going to be basically repealed. It's going to be revoked. It's going to be overturned by the Supreme Court, and we may have the original rules back in play, which is what the Republican Party wants. The Democrats want modifications. They want people to go and help collect ballots. They want typically waivers of signature requirements. They want extended deadlines and all of these things. And the Republican Party, just generally speaking, does not. They want the election rules as they were to stand. That has been my analysis. Now, there are a lot of reactions to Amy Coney Barrett getting on the court. We've talked about court packing. We've talked about the modifying of the definition of court packing. We have seen it go from being the word that defines literally adding people onto the court, from going from that definition to being just this idea that the Republicans are packing the court simply because they're filling vacancies. Well, now that was the old debate. Now it's just sort of outright, yeah, we're going to be packing the court. We saw that from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. We saw that from Ilhan Omar last night. We see a lot of people in the mainstream media and a lot of people at the New York Times and other, big publications are now really moving for that. They're actually openly saying, yep, okay, now it's time to pack the court or drastically change how the judiciary works. And so I want to spend a little time talking about that. But before we do, let's take a look at some of these other reactions from around the country. Here we have Senator Richard Blumenthal and we've got Chuck Schumer. So these are both Democratic senators and they gave their response yesterday. Let's take a listen.
Nothing less than everything is at stake. A shift in the balance of the court that will last for decades if we do not act to correct it. And believe me, there are appropriate measures that should be considered.
And the next time the American people give Democrats a majority in this chamber, you will have forfeited the right to tell us how to run that majority.
So, obviously they're upset about it. Their side just lost. I think they're sort of reeling from this because their party's largely responsible for their own situation. And it just stinks when you're responsible for your own mistake. You have to kind of own that. But they're trying to blame it on the Republicans, but it's really not the Republicans' fault, right? Barack Obama was in the White House. They had the Senate for a long time. They could have filled a lot of the vacancies that were left open by the Obama administration during his tenure. They presumed that Hillary Clinton was going to win. Justice Ginsburg could have stepped down at that point in time. Obama could have replaced her, her seat on the Supreme Court. There's a lot of things that could have changed. And remember, Harry Reid was the one who actually got rid of the filibuster for this stuff. So, the Democrats are largely responsible for the procedural environment that resulted in Amy Coney Barrett getting nominated. Now they're upset, so they want to change the rules. We'll talk about what some of their propositions are and why they're ridiculous, but let's take a look at who else is angry. We have some more angry Democrats. We have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, as I mentioned. She said immediately last night, expand the court at 8:13 p.m. So as soon as Amy Coney Barrett was, sort of gone through the process, we have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says expand the court. So what she's meaning there is pack the court. She wants to actually, add additional justices onto the court. She's using expand, but it's called pack. Republicans do this because they don't believe Dems have the stones to play hardballs like they do. And for a long time, they've been correct. But do not let them bully the public into thinking their bulldozing is normal, but a response isn't. There is a legal process for expansion. And even though I disagree with expansion, she's 100% right. It is legal. It's in the Constitution. The U.S. Congress can decide that they want to modify the judiciary. I'm going to show you a little bit from the Constitution specifically about how that works. But she's right. This is something that is possible. And if they did that, can you blame them for it? I mean, truthfully, can you? No, you can't, right? It's politics. And you would expect both sides of this to go and win. And the Republicans did that, as they should have. The Republicans are elected to do their job, and voters want them to go and perform in Washington. Same with the Democrats. And so I fully expect there to be a substantial, significant portion of the Democrats who are really serious about moving this forward. I think it's a disaster of an idea, but they're welcome to do it. It's part of our Constitution. It's part of our rule of law. I think it's important that voters know about it, and then they can act accordingly. If this is a popular thing, if the AOC wing of the Democratic Party thinks that this is an issue that they can win on, they should certainly run on it. But we should know a little bit more about how that is going to turn out. We should know what Joe Biden and what Kamala Harris want to do on this issue. And so far, we just haven't heard anything about it. They're going to continue to punt this issue until after the election because they know whatever answer they give is going to alienate certain factions of the demographics that they're trying to secure to win the White House. And that's specifically if they say court packing is something they're on board for, they're going to alienate the moderates. If they say they're not interested in that, they're going to alienate AOC and all of the further left people. So they just can't say anything about it. They're stuck between a rock and a hard place, as it were. Now, AOC has some colleagues in Congress. We're talking about Nancy Pelosi, who says that President Trump and Senate Republicans have committed an act of supreme desperation. Okay. Jamming through a Supreme Court nominee just 8 days before Election Day as part of their years-long campaign to destroy Americans' health. All right. So, again, with the political dramatics, political theater. All, we see this every time something happens. All of the politicians come out and they use this type of language that's hyperbole, and I think it's really destructive. I hate when both sides do it. Here, Nancy Pelosi is saying we're going to destroy Americans' healthcare. Is that really going to happen because Amy Coney Barrett is on the court? Are they really going to destroy healthcare in this country? Really? Maybe they will, right? I don't know. Personally, I don't think so. I think that there is a lot more that can be done, certainly with healthcare. But are we just going to see our doctors disappear because Amy Coney Barrett is on the Supreme Court? Did your doctor disappear today because she's on the court? No, they didn't. And, this is going to be something where we're going to see a lot more hyperbole, a lot more just over the top language. We see it from the Republicans too. They don't get an excuse about how, socialism is going to destroy the country. And, Kamala Harris is the most liberal senator in the whole world ever to have ever lived. And if she gets elected, communist China is going to take over the country. Don't think that's going to happen either, but this is an election year, so we should get used to that language. All right, what I want to talk about now is some of the propositions and the fixes that the Democrats and other people are proposing in order to modify the court to actually, fix the court according to their language. And then once we're done with this, we're going to move on to the Philadelphia shooting. So before we get into what their solutions are, let's do a quick refresher on what the Constitution of the United States says. What can they do and what can they not do? Remember that the U.S. Constitution, in my mind, is one of the most brilliant documents ever written, but this is not something that is a huge novel. It's not a huge book or an encyclopedia just filled with language. It's actually quite short. It's actually a very brief document, which is both sort of brilliant in its wisdom and its simplicity. But here is what it says. Now, as a quick refresher, if you haven't read the Constitution in a long time, you may want to. You can turn over to Article 3. In Article 1, the Constitution sets up Congress. In Article 2, they set up the executive branch. Then in Article 3, we talk about the judiciary. Remember, we have 3 branches of government. They're all co-equal branches. They all have checks and balances, and they all have certain power. And when we talk about Article 3, this is it. This is the whole thing. This sets up the entire judiciary for the entire United States. It's these 3 sections. And the first one is really the most important. And this is the one where we spent some time talking about it. But it says, the judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court. Okay, this is the Constitution. So in order to modify any of this stuff, you got to amend the Constitution. Okay, unless this document gives the different branches of government some specific power. So if you want to change this, it's a big process. And remember, the process for amending the Constitution, two-thirds of the House of Representatives and the Congress have to be on board with the change. And then once it's proposed, then 3/4 of the states have to ratify it. Then the president has to sign it into law. It becomes an amendment. It is a massive, massive project, and it is a massive hurdle. It was designed that way. We don't want the Constitution to be easily amended. We don't want sort of the fluctuations of democracy to be changing this document on a whim. It's a big deal. We do it for important things like women's suffrage. We do it for ending slavery. We do it for big deals. And is this one of those things? Is this one of those because they're upset that the court is balanced more towards originalism? Is that justification to go and amend the Constitution? Not in my mind. Let's go back to it. So it says one Supreme Court, and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. So one Supreme Court is guaranteed by the Constitution, but other courts Congress can establish. Judges, both of the Supreme and the inferior courts, shall hold their offices during good behavior and shall at stated times receive for their services compensation, which shall not be diminished during their continuance in office. Section 2 is going to talk about all of the different powers that the courts have and what types of cases they can hear. So between a state and citizens of another state, between citizens of different states, cases affecting ambassadors, arguments between the states, cases of admiralty and maritime jurisdiction, trials of all crimes. That's about it. Right? So there's a lot of brilliance that takes place in these 3 paragraphs, and a lot of time that our courts have done dissecting it, saying, well, what, does this arise under the Constitution? Are these cases and controversies? And you can spend a lot of time analyzing this particular document, as you'll find we did in law school, and people continue to do on a daily basis, analyzing the text of this and interpreting it. And that's what Amy Coney Barrett is intending to do, right? She wants to be on the court to interpret the text in a way that is in line with the original intent of the document. What does the original document say? So now what the proposals are, this comes from a New York Times article. There are many. There are a lot of different interesting proposals. Some I've heard of, some I have not heard of, but they are interesting. Let's talk about some of them. So number one, they want to create a new court. So create a new court, so a different one that would not essentially be the Supreme Court. They want to call it the United States Constitutional Court, and there may be something where they want to give an even number of judges so that there never is a supermajority. So remember when we just read Article 3, the Congress can create other courts. They're called inferior courts. So one of the proposals is to have the Congress create other inferior courts and just kind of funnel cases over to those courts rather than the Supreme Court. So they want to sort of take the ball away from the Supreme Court. They want to give justices term limits. So this is another one. One of the proposals we've heard about, we've covered it on this channel, is that they want to create an 18-year term for each of the judges. That way they don't have too much influence. And we just read in Article 3 that they serve for a lifetime appointment. So how does that work? Well, one of the things that they're talking about doing is moving the judges off of the bench so that they're still a judge, but they're not a Supreme Court judge. So you have a term limit of 18 years, and then they'll move you back down to a district court or to a circuit court, like the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. So if Amy Coney Barrett came over from the 7th Circuit, she now would spend 18 years on the court and then maybe go back to the 7th Circuit or go back to a different district court that has availability. So they're talking about that. Now, in my mind, if you want to limit the terms of the judges, you need a constitutional amendment. I don't know that they can actually get away with that. I think the courts would interpret that maneuver as saying, we're trying to remove you from your office. And the Supreme Court judges are probably going to vote that doesn't happen, right? If the case goes in front of the Supreme Court, are they going to say, sure, I can't wait to get out of here in 18 years? I don't think so. So I don't know that that's going to fly. I don't know how realistic it is. Another one is don't let the court choose the cases that it wants. So as it exists right now, courts will listen to appeals and arguments, they're called writs of certiorari, and those have to get submitted to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court can decline to take cases. So one of the proposals is to force them to take the cases that they want. So they have a little bit more, I would say, a little bit less discretion on what they can hear. There's another argument here that they want to just threaten to pack the courts. We saw this during FDR's administration. He actually was getting the Supreme Court during Roosevelt's time was really overturning and eliminating a lot of his New Deal programs. And what they did, he threatened to pack the court. I think he wanted to expand it to 15 judges. And suddenly the justices started approving his deals. So he kind of scared them into compliance. Pack the courts. We already know what that means. We've covered that a lot on this channel. We saw AOC wants to do it. Ilhan Omar wants to do it. We see this being tossed around from a lot of other prominent people in the media and in the party. Another one would be to expand the lower courts. And then, of course, finally keep the courts the same. So for expanding the lower courts, this happens all the time, and this has happened very frequently in our history. And so back, before, I think in the 1800s, all the way up to sort of the Reconstruction era, post-Civil War, we did see some additions of different district courts or different circuits. And when they would add different circuits, they would actually add Supreme Court judges. And so actually, we actually had a time when we had 10 Supreme Court judges, and then a circuit court was sort of modified, and we settled back down on 9. And then for the last 151 years, I think, we have had 9 judges, because that's a pretty good number, and there's been no basis for expanding it or changing it. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. We'll see if they decide that they want to make those efforts and how that will settle out. All right. So that is the big news on the Supreme Court. And everybody, we're done. We're done with that. Now, Amy Coney Barrett is on the court. We don't have to analyze it anymore. We don't have to play the game of the confirmation process, which in my opinion is just a big show trial. Don't have to do any of that anymore. She's on the court. Now, we're going to certainly be following the response. What are they going to do after she's on the bench? And more specifically, what's going to happen if we start seeing a lot of 6-3 opinions come out, or 5-4 opinions? What if Roberts joins the liberals on a lot of these decisions? And now we're seeing just a consistent conservative, sort of overturning of any liberal objectives. What's going to happen? It may give them a lot of fuel to move forward with their court packing agenda. But we will see. All right. Now we have to talk about the next story today. So if you have not already seen, there was another shooting last night, this one involving this gentleman by the name of Walter Wallace Jr. Walter Wallace Jr. is a 27-year-old. He's obviously a black man. This took place in West Philadelphia. He's a brother, a father, and a son, and he was shot 10 times by the police, which is a lot. That's a lot of shots. Wallace was armed with a knife when the video when it took place. It does look like he was actually sort of charging at the officers. We have the video. We're going to play it. It's not gruesome in my mind. We're going to get age restricted as a result of that. So if you are not logged into YouTube or want to watch this, make sure that you are logged in. The police spokesman, his sergeant name is Eric Grip. He said that the officers had ordered Wallace to drop the weapon, and he continued to advance towards them. They are reviewing all of the additional footage. So presumably they had body camera footage. Both officers, were actually wearing body cameras. Wallace's father stated that Wallace was struggling with mental health issues, and they were wondering why the officers couldn't use a taser or a non-lethal weapon, something like like a taser or there's other methodologies, why was non-lethal force not used? In the video, Wallace's mother was trying to defuse the situation. She was yelling, put the gun down, don't shoot him. He's going to put the gun down. We know him. Wallace proceeded to walk past the mother. He continued toward the cops, and then that's when the cops shot him. Now, both of these officers have not been identified yet. The investigation is ongoing. They have been relieved of active duty at this time, so they're going to be on administrative leave. And, the story is going to continue to develop. We have seen a lot of the aftermath in Philadelphia, and it has not been pretty. This is one of the most, I would say, sort of extreme responses that we have covered on this show. And if you're not familiar with this channel, we've covered a lot of these, okay? We've covered everything from Breonna Taylor to George Floyd to Rayshard Brooks to Jacob Blake to the Ahmaud Arbery case. We've covered Kyle Rittenhouse. We've done a lot of sort of analysis on these types of situations in the past, and I know I'm forgetting a lot of them because there's been a lot that we've covered, but those are sort of the big ones. And so when we were watching this, we were watching it using the same sort of framework. We were looking specifically at whether there was a weapon, whether he was in pursuit or running away, and whether the officers waited, if it was a sort of a last minute option for them. And so I have the video here. We are going to play it. It's not particularly, there is a man dying in it. So let me give you a content warning. There is a man being shot 10 times, but there is a sort of a break in the frame and a break in the footage. So the cameraman actually takes the camera off while the shots are being fired. And for that reason, I don't think that it is too gruesome for YouTube, in other words. So we are going to play it. Now, I want to just point out that this is not the original video. This video was something that I found from somebody I follow on Twitter who does an excellent job. Her name is Elle. Her handle is @somebitchiknow, @somebitchiknow. And her handle on YouTube is L is the way. Does a really good job of what is called stabilizing the video. So when a person has their cell phone and they're recording, you're going to see the cell phone kind of, flopping all over the place like this. And the subject is going to be rotating around in the imagery a lot. And so what she has done on this is actually stabilized it. So she'll take the subject of the video, which is going to be the person and the people standing upright. And even though the phone is moving around, she's actually adjusting the frames in the video so you can get a little bit of a clearer picture of exactly what happened. She did a very good job on it. And the clip that she put together is 2 minutes. And I'm going to link over to her stuff. So please go support the original creator. Go, subscribe to her channel. Go follow her on Twitter. Want to really, really encourage that, because there are a lot of really good alternative individuals out there who are doing better work, in my opinion, than anybody in the media is doing. And this is one of those people. So big shout out to Elle. Nice job on all of your hard work. Thanks for doing that. So let me show you this clip, and then we'll go through it. So as a quick reminder, the first part of this is going to be in real time, and then the second part of it is going to be in slow motion. And Elle here actually circles where you can see some of the knife and where you can follow this whole situation as it unfolds. So let's take a look at this video from Miss Elle. All right, here we go.
Yo, watch the wheel. Don't shoot the wheel.
All right, so
yo, this shit crazy. You gonna smoke? Yo. Yo, watch my wheel.
Okay, so watch this officer.
Yo, this shit
right there. You just saw him. He's running around this way. He's going to come out around this way. They're both literally running away from the guy. And then the shots happen, so you don't even really see it. All right, so now let's watch it in slow-mo. Now you're going to hear a little bit. You're going to hear a little bit from the guy. So we'll listen to him right now. So you see that officer. Now watch him run around this backside of this vehicle. So we're in super slow-mo now. The shouting's going to stop here in a minute. All right, so that officer was actually going around the back of the vehicle, and there is the knife that we see that first enters the frame. So see this officer. We're going to see him shoot back this way. There he is going across the back. So he's running away from him at that point. Mom tries to stop him. She gets sort of thrown away. He continues to pull around. That other officer is back on the other side of this red van. He's going to be coming around here, and the other gentleman is still racing around this side. Both have guns, both shouting with hand signals. So you saw the hand signal. Then the shots happen. Now you can see right here, it looked like his weight was on the ball of his front foot. And then, all right, so enough of that. All right, so when you go through that and you analyze it, I'm going to show you the specific rules and the rationales and the different policies and goals that we see in the Philadelphia Police Department. But from that viewing of that, in my mind, it looks pretty unequivocal that there was a knife and that he was actually approaching the officers. Now, the contrast to that, or the counterpoint, is that they were a good distance away from him, right? They fired at him. If they would have kept backing up, if they would have used a taser, they could have continued to run away. And the argument would be that, maybe he wouldn't have been so violent. Maybe that his family, his mom knew he had mental problems, his friend knew he had mental problems, and they could have gone and, actually diffused the situation. And so, those are the two ways that you can look at it. We are going to get over into the actual rules as they are dictated by the Philadelphia Police Department, and then we can analyze it according to their own rules and see what that helps us determine. But we can take a look at what's been going on. Mass protests on the streets, a lot of people out there. They're shouting, Black Lives Matter, of course, and they're shouting, say his name, Walter Wallace. And so we've seen a lot of people just sort of, fill the streets. We have seen just sort of a lot of destruction. Here we see that the protests were going on. We see, burning vehicles right in the middle of the road. We're pretty much used to this imagery at this point in time. Every time an incident like this happens, this tends to be the response. Police coming in full force to try to quell the unrest. Lots of looting going on. People are going basically insane over this. So that vehicle that you saw, that truck just drove through the crowd going very quickly and actually hit a police officer who is on the ground. I heard that she is alive and okay, just broke a leg. But I don't know. We don't know what her condition is at this point in time. So obviously things are really heating up in Philadelphia as a result of this shooting. The question is, was it justified or not, which we will dive into here in a little bit. We've got some more clips. The actual, the people who are protesting are literally chasing the cops away. They are so overwhelming in their numbers that the police cannot even keep up. And we're not talking about, a handful of police officers. It looks like, half the police department. Let's take a look at this clip.
Oh, shit.
That's a lot of officers.
Damn.
And they can't control this.
Oh, get him, yeah. That's what I like. What the fuck I like? Yeah, that's what I like.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. Yo.
Yeah, I mean, disturbing stuff going on out there. To me, that looks like a street war, right? You've got two factions who are throwing things at each other. We've got people who are getting run over by vehicles. You've got, explosions going on. We've got another clip here with explosions. We've got this, interesting billboard in the back from another lawyer who is saying the power of justice. So this vehicle literally explodes. Okay, I don't know what that was, but something in the vehicle. We have the power of justice up there. So this guy, Rosenbaum Injury Law, it's some good advertising for his law firm, or maybe not so good. I don't know. The power of justice. So this is what street justice looks like. This is what apparently somebody thinks the solution is. Anytime that a black guy gets shot by the police, that they want to torch the city. I don't know how that contributes to justice reform. I've asked for a long time on this channel, what can we do to help this? And so far from BLM or from a lot of these other groups, these protest groups, these peaceful protesters, I still don't know what they're interested in terms of reforming the justice system. What do they want? Do they want qualified immunity ended? Do they want a police oversight board? Do they want mandatory body cameras? Do they want, nationwide Brady lists? What do they want? If they can detail that, then I'd be happy to help support the cause. But until then, burning down the cities, burning down the streets, running over cops, looting stores is not a solution, and this is not okay. Now, let's go back to what the Philadelphia Police Department manual actually says in itself. So this is from Directive 10.2. This was actually updated on September 1st, 2020. So the original effective date of this use of force, limited force policy was on 9/18/15. But as we know, in light of George Floyd, a lot of the different police departments are really modifying all of their procedures, or at least updating them. And this was updated this year, not too long ago, in fact. So a couple things we want to look at. This is the table of contents. Specifically, we want to look at Section 4. When it comes to use of force, we want to look at the policy. What's the purpose of all this stuff? And then the rest of this stuff is really for about sort of reporting procedures. So if you are involved, if you're an officer and you're involved in a use of force situation, then what they'll do is they'll actually say, this is how you do it. If you use your baton, follow these procedures. If you use your taser, use these procedures. If you happen to shoot somebody resulting in death or seriously bodily injury, use these procedures. So all of this is, contact your lieutenant, contact your supervisor, file this form, do that. But so we're not going to spend a lot of time on that. What I do want to talk about is the policy. So more specifically, what is the policy here? Primary duty of all police officers is to preserve human life. You'll see this a lot in different use of force manuals. It's always about preserving human life. I don't think that there's any question about that. They all are very clear on that. Only the amount of force necessary to protect life should be used. Excessive force not tolerated. Minimal amount of force necessary. Use reasonable and safe means of control, and so on, right? Then we see down here that subjects may be physically or mentally incapable of responding to police commands due to a variety of circumstances, things like alcohol, drugs, mental impairment, medical conditions, language, cultural barriers, and so on and so forth. Officers should be mindful of this when making use of force decisions. So they have contemplated this issue, right? We have heard from Wallace's family that there is, potential that he had some mental issues and that he had some mental problems going on. And certainly we want to take that into account. And so the manual is specifically saying that. Now, at the same time, you need to ask yourself, did the police kind of do everything they can to mitigate the situation before they fired their shots? And in my mind, I think that they did. They were running around the vehicle for a long time. I think a lot of other officers that we've seen in other situations would have used their firearm prior to that, prior to literally backing up for a good 20 seconds or so, actually trying to disengage this guy for 20 seconds as he was running around the vehicle and then approaching them. And so I think they did a good job of that. The other thing that I wanted to highlight here is that the officer we saw was giving commands. He was put the knife down, put it down. He was yelling, not down, drop it, drop it. So he's using verbal commands. He's using physical commands, and they're running away from the guy. They're trying to do everything they can to not shoot their firearm. And unfortunately, they needed to do so. So let's take a look at the definitions. That's the next part of the manual here. And this is some important stuff, so I want to spend a little time on it. Let me move myself over there. All right. Definitions. They're talking about this standard that we speak about a lot on this channel. It's called whether something was objectively reasonable. Okay, so they call this a Fourth Amendment standard where an officer's belief that they must protect themselves from death or seriously bodily injury is what a reasonable or rational officer would have believed under similar circumstances. So we call this in law the reasonable person standard. It's different from a subjective standard. So a subjective standard says that if you specifically are in that position, what did you think was reasonable? You as that individual, you as Officer Smith or whatever his name is. Did that person think it was reasonable? That's different than what would an objective reasonable person, what would any reasonable person do in that situation? It's different. It's a nuanced difference, but it's different. And what we're talking about here is what would an objective officer think? So if you just took any reasonable officer and you put them in that same position, would they agree that this was sort of the end of the line? They had no other choice but to use their firearm. And I think many officers would agree. I think, quite frankly, I think all officers or most officers tend to agree with most use of force cases. So just because they tend to agree with it doesn't mean that it's right, because they sort of default. But if you or I were in that position, if you or I were an officer or a reasonable person were in that position, would you think that this was reasonable? I think you probably would find that. I think a jury would find that as well. So what they're going to look at is the determination is made by reviewing all the relevant facts and the circumstances of each particular case. So specifically, the severity of the crime at issue, and we don't really know what that was other than this guy was just kind of running around with a knife. So that one is not as relevant as some of the other things. Number two, whether the suspect poses an immediate threat to the safety of the officers or others, which I think is very clear. This guy is running around with a knife. He actually looked like he kind of threw his mother to the ground, and he continued to literally follow the officers around the vehicles. So this wasn't a situation where they just both happened to be going the same direction or something like that. These officers were literally trying to change their angle in order to create distance between themselves and this guy, and he just continued to pursue them. So number two, I think, is very clear that he was an immediate threat, or at least believed to be an immediate threat and reasonably believed to be an immediate threat. And then number three, whether the suspect is actively resisting arrest or attempting to evade arrest by flight. Again, I think no question about that. He was not responding to any commands. He had physically had a weapon in his possession, and he was literally running around multiple vehicles in defiance of the cops' commands. So just based on these three things, I think that it weighs in favor of what they did being justified and reasonable. Note, resisting arrest or flight alone would not justify the use of deadly force, which I totally agree with. This was my main critique in the Rayshard Brooks case. Remember that one where Rayshard Brooks kind of got the upper hand on those two officers and then was running away and they shot him in the back? It's totally different than this. He's running away. This guy is running towards the cops. So it's different there. And they're not outside, I think, of the guidelines here. It says that the Supreme Court has identified three factors that should be evaluated in determining whether an officer's use of force was objectively reasonable, but they're going to be looking at the totality of the circumstances. And the Supreme Court's list is not all inclusive, meaning everything has not been defined. So a lot of this stuff is very fact intensive. It's very fact based. They need to know what was the totality of the circumstances that led the officer to believe that force was needed. And other factors can include whether the individual is violent. I think we have a check mark there. Possibility that he's armed. We knew that he was. The number of persons with whom an officer must contend with at the time are all relevant factors to consider. And of course, there were a lot of people there. Individual factors alone without additional articulable facts may be insufficient to satisfy the objectively reasonable standard. So what we're talking about is just sort of taking everything into consideration and then doing an analysis on that basis. They give us some guidelines, some signposts that we can follow, whether he was an immediate threat, he seemed to be, whether he was actively resisting arrest or denying their commands, he seemed to be. We don't know about the severity of the crime at issue, but he was running around with a knife. He's a danger to the community. He's a danger to other people. There was an attempt made by his mother to stop him, and that failed, and he kept coming after the police. So I think it's hard to make an argument that the police were totally out of line on this one. Now, they also have what's called a use of force decision chart. This may help clear some of how this works. It says that we start with no force. So the use of force report is not required. They don't have to report any of this stuff. Verbal commands, the officer presence, the offender threat level was obedient, compliant, non-aggressive. So we see that the officer options were being used. They were giving verbal commands. They were there. They were making themselves known with physical hand movements and different gestures. And this person, Wallace was not being obedient, compliant, and he was being very aggressive. So it moves up to the next level, right? Whether there are physical control holds, whether they're trying to use, mace or pepper spray. And this individual here, this offender threat, is resisting and non-compliant. So he's definitely in that category, right? He's definitely in that one. And so they theoretically could have used physical control holds and OC spray. But really, was he in this other category or even this top category? So physically aggressive or assaultive behavior with immediate likelihood of injury to self or others. So I think pretty clearly he's there, right? He's physically aggressive. He's running the police down. He's threw his mother down, knocked her over, and he was running around with a knife. So additional options there would be a taser and then a baton. But then we see here at the very top that the officer options are to use the firearm. The offender behavior, objectively reasonable belief that there is an immediate threat of death or serious bodily injury. So this is where the big distinction comes in, right? Do you think that the police could have used a taser or a baton with some chance of success? I think arguably you could make that case. You could say that they could have shot him with the taser when he was a certain distance away and he would have, presumably fallen and dropped the knife. But if he was approaching them literally, at a fast rate of speed, by the time you take that taser out and he's closing the distance rapidly, there may be no time, if the taser fails, to then pull out your gun and discharge your firearm. So, those are the types of situations that we default to the officers who were there on the scene. And in my mind, that's the only real reasonable way we can do it. And believe me, I'm very highly critical of officers, right? I tend to find that they act overly quickly with the use of force. And in this situation, when we have no evidence to the contrary, we have to default to the people who are on the ground. And in this case, there were two officers who both saw what was happening and they both fired their weapons simultaneously. So we have to just sort of presume that they felt that they were both under threat, right? And it becomes even more substantive. It's even more justified when you have two officers who are both sort of coming to the same conclusion independently. Okay, Officer A in this situation wasn't looking at Officer B and saying, "Hey, Officer B, do you think we should discharge our weapons right now? Well, let's analyze the triangle here and let's see what chart we're in and have a conversation about it." No, both of these men were in the middle of a situation that was moving very quickly. Remember, that whole thing was basically less than 30 seconds, happened very quickly. And they both discharged their weapons because they both felt that they were under threat. So if two of them are coming to the same conclusion, it's more likely that they are objectively fearful that there is a potential for death or serious bodily injury. So I think this one is pretty justified in terms of the police response. Now, the alternative would be, like I said, what else can we do to negate these types of situations from happening? What else can be done? Well, I'm in huge favor of more mental health support, more tools for that. I am in favor of having a potential mental health team respond to these situations to see if there is other things that can be done. But when you have a person who is literally running around the neighborhood with a knife and chasing police, what is a mental health team going to do about that? We don't want to put those people in that position, and they don't want to be put in that position. So, this is one of those things that's kind of an impossible situation for the police. They certainly do not wake up wanting to shoot this person, but they have to because there is no other choice. And so that is my take on that. Let's see what the DA says. Remember, a lot of this stuff is very political at this moment in time. DA Larry Krasner says, "We intend to go where the facts and law lead us and to do so carefully without rushing to judgment and without bias of any kind. The Philadelphia DA's office takes its obligation seriously. They are focused on the fatal shooting. They've been on scene with other people. They're doing a joint investigation with the officer-involved shooting investigation unit. They intend to go where the facts take them. People who witness this incident or have information or believe to know anything about it, call this number. In the hours and days following the shooting, we ask Philadelphians to come together and uphold the people's freedom to express themselves peacefully and to reject violence of any kind." The mayor came out and said, "My statement, my prayers are with the family and friends of Walter Wallace. I have watched the video. Tragic incident. It presents difficult questions that must be answered. Spoke tonight with Mr. Wallace's family and will continue to reach out to hear their concerns. officer shooting is doing their full investigation and onward. And then lastly, we have the Fraternal Order of the Police, which came out and they're saying our officers are being vilified this evening for doing their job and keeping the community safe after being confronted by a man with a knife. We support and defend these officers. They too are traumatized by being involved in a fatal shooting. We ask the public for its patience as investigators work to gather all the facts of this tragic incident in West Philadelphia today. So thoughts and prayers and so on. So, another shooting, very unfortunate, but it's not one of those where I think that the police were acting with egregious misconduct. I don't even think there's any misconduct there at all, quite frankly. And I know that is not a popular position on Watching the Watchers, because a lot of the time what we want to do is identify the police misconduct, but I just don't really identify any there. Now, if more comes out, I'm happy to modify my opinion on that. But from what I saw, it did look like this man was armed and he was chasing the police after a lot of attempts, like 20 seconds of attempts to get away from the situation. And I think that the police acted properly and they had no alternative, which is unfortunate because now a man is dead. A family is losing a father, a son, a brother. Police themselves are in a difficult spot. They're involved in a shooting and they're having to deal with the consequence of that. So not anything that, we would wish on anybody, but what do you have to say about that? Now is the time for a little bit of the chat. As a reminder, my Tuesdays are a little bit shorter. I have some people actually coming in to do some work around the studio. They're going to move a door and help some things out. So we're getting some improvements, some upgrades over here. So we're going to take about 10, 15 minutes of chats. So if you have anything in the chat you want to chime in on, let's take a look at it. And before we do, remember to warm up those fingers on the keyboard by saying hello to Miss Faith. She's right back there. Let's say hi, Faith. She's awesome. She helps me do my show prep and she can help me stay on track. So thank you, Miss Faith. All right, let's jump on over to the chat. We have True Seeker who says mental health teams would call the police in this situation. I agree with that. Let's see. Eric Insomnia FX says the fatal mistake was rushing someone with a knife. No one gets paid to take a knife to one's neck. Somebody says Gigi's back. Hey, Gigi. He says hi, Faith. RAS Illusion says we can do better. Says I was at our law group. I was watching abruptly, and it was in Florida. They're tired of trying to reform the police. They want it dismantled. This was at a peaceful protest live a few minutes ago. So he's saying that there are people who literally want to dismantle the police. I've never been a fan of that. I've never been in favor of that. This defund the police thing is I think a solution that nobody's asking for. I don't know what the alternative is, that it's just going to be kind of a free-for-all. I am very, very in favor of police reform, but defunding the police in their entirety, I'm not sure that is such a good idea. ALXSSA, so maybe Alyssa, says, I live in Philadelphia. We need more policing in our communities. We need to stop the actual crime. Woody H says, hi, Miss Faith. We got Brenda Zimmer who says, from what I heard, Philadelphia police were turned down getting tasers. So that would be interesting also. Were there other alternative mechanisms of non-lethal force that could have been utilized, but maybe the police department dropped the ball on it? So we saw this with the Jacob Blake case. Remember this one? I got skewered on my analysis for that on this channel, but the police didn't have any body cameras. Why not? No, they probably didn't want them. And I think that's a huge problem. I would like to see more police with more body cameras. And I would like to see a lot of that stuff publicly available and accessible in these types of situations. All right. So we've got Ninox says, we missed you, Faith. Much better with you here. That's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. No police and you get the CAZ mobs killing people. That comes from Jay Shoptaw. We have Paul Fun who says, defund them, start over. They are goon squad cults with military gear. They kick in doors and they shoot you dead for nothing. So Paul is in favor of the defund the police movement. Now, I have said for a long time on this channel specifically that the police, I kind of agree with some of your statement there, right? That the police think that they're in the middle of Iraq a lot of the times. They think they're in the middle of a war zone and they gear up like they're going into combat, with this, militia force, and they're just on civilian streets. They're dealing with people like you or me. They're dealing with civilians. They're dealing with people who don't have any military experience. And so we're just regular everyday people. And many of us have been sort of indoctrinated over the years to think that the police are the good guys. Oh, they're just going to show up and help you. They care care about you. They are wholesome, upstanding, nice men and women who only have your best interest at heart. Well, that's a nice fairy tale if you're, a young child. But when you get into the real world, you learn that the police are just like us. They're just people, and they make mistakes, and they have problems, and they've got their own issues that they're dealing with in their lives. And what we need to do is help ensure that we get the right people on the police department. We don't want the people who are out there looking for an adrenaline rush, looking to run out into the streets and start cracking heads and shooting people. Those people have to be filtered out. But we want to keep the good cops, the people who are who are there for the right reasons, with the right mindset, understanding that they've got a duty and an obligation, and they have to be of service to us as citizens in society. We want more of those, and we need to protect those cops. We need to protect them and ensure that they have a safe space to blow the whistle on these other bad cops. What we've seen and what we've covered here is that when they speak out, they get disciplined, they get reprimanded, they get sort of extra exiled from their fellow comrades in the police department. And we don't want that. We want to give them freedom. We want to give them opportunity to actually speak out so that we can reform the system through and through. Yeah, and then, RSCMR has a great point. So whatever that name is, RSCMRCMD says they are in the middle of a war zone. And that's true. They are now in Philadelphia. They are in the middle of a war zone. I would agree with that. And, this is something where you have to have this conversation now. Is it time to bring the feds in? Is it time to bring the National Guard in? Or should the police are clearly getting overwhelmed in Philadelphia right now. So I can see both sides of that argument. I mean, in my opinion, cops who are out there writing traffic tickets all day and then they just, grab somebody out of the car and smash their head into the ground. That's what I see most of. Those cops are acting like they're in the middle of a war zone. They're not. They're just pulling over a 23-year-old ASU college student, and then she's coming into my office with bruises and injuries and scrapes and cuts for no reason. So those cops are the cops I'm talking about. Philadelphia, that's a totally different situation. They are in the middle of a war zone, and I empathize with those police because they're dealing with a lot of danger and a lot of chaos right now. Pablo Lasha says, I am critical of police abuse, but it's naive to put these socioeconomic problems which lead to these situations solely at the feet of law enforcement. There is a failure of government in a lot of these places. I agree with that. The government is typically closely related, if not exactly the problem. Zulu is here. He says, he's talking to RAS Illusion. He says, and I can totally understand the fear given what they believe. That's what makes this so hard to defrag. Okay, Silver Sharky's in town. He says, I don't want to be high when a crazy guy is charging me with a knife. Charles Argo says, maybe we should get the 911 call to hear what was said to the officers. Yeah, that's a good point too, right? You want to know what the officers knew as they were approaching the scene. So what we typically will see is they'll get the call, they'll get a, buzz. Hey, we have a disorderly conduct disturbance situation taking place at this intersection. Caller identified the male as whatever. We pulled him up. We ran his record. Did he have any open cases? Did he have any warrants out for his arrest? Does he have a prior history of violence? Did they know any of those things, or were they just going in cold? In my opinion, it really doesn't matter either way. Honestly, if this guy had a record that was immaculate and they showed up and he was acting this way, what they did, I think, was still reasonable. And it would have been the same if in the alternative. If they showed up and they knew this guy was very dangerous, maybe he had already been to jail before. I don't know. I don't know the research on what his background looks like. But if they did know that, then you would even give them even more credit, right? Because they were running away from somebody that they knew was highly violent and very aggressive. So you would give them even more benefit for being so restrained if they knew that he had a violent background. We have some other thoughts. NRA Ram says, I guess the big push for females to join the police force in Philadelphia a couple of years back wasn't working out for them. We have a question from Gigi. He says, R&R, why didn't police use a taser? They acted fine, but shooting 10 bullets seems a bit overkill. No. Yeah, I mean, it is overkill. The idea between discharging a weapon, like that is you're going to kill the person. That is the point. And once that first bullet is fired, they need to make sure that that person is dead. That's why. I think it's a gruesome justification for it, but the reason why they want to do it quickly is so that person is not laying on the ground bleeding out for 2 or 3 minutes. If they shot this person in the stomach or in the side or in the lung or in the chest and he's laying on the ground literally asphyxiating from his, dying is a very gruesome, very horrendous thing, obviously. And if somebody's laying in the street and dying out slowly, that is much more painful and less humane than just ending their life immediately. And 10 bullets will end their life immediately, obviously. So the question about using a taser, again, I think that comes down to a fact-specific analysis by the officers who were there on the scene. So you have these two officers who are going to be both discharging their weapons simultaneously. They're both in the position to make the judgment call. Do they have enough time, based on how fast he was coming towards them, based upon what they had already been doing, running away from this guy, to actually draw a taser, pull it, and shoot him with the taser? And then if that didn't work, then have enough time to drop the taser, pick up a gun, and then discharge their firearm. Was there enough time there? I don't know. Arguably, sure, right? And there's two of them. So you could also make the argument that one of them should have tried that. One of them should have tried it. And if he didn't, if he didn't do it, then the other officer could have shot him. If the taser didn't stop him, the other officer could have jumped in and then contributed to the disengagement. But it happened so fast. Literally, as he turned that corner, we're talking about a matter of a second or two. So it's very difficult to come to a clear conclusion on that. Yeah, and I think Scotch is kind of hitting it on the head. Scotch says, no matter how much training they have, they are still humans, which is exactly right. In a perfect world, they would have had enough time to have that conversation. Hey, why don't you try your taser? If the taser doesn't work, then I'll try my gun. But there just wasn't enough time. It happened all too quickly. Scotch also says, never use a beanbag in a life-threatening situation. We have RAS Illusion. He says, regarding cell phones, SCOTUS recently had to be terse when saying, get a warrant. That means, no, you can't dig inside until you get a warrant. We ought to hold that line elsewhere in the law, too. And pepper spray. It would be, USA Libertarian says, pepper spray. Says it would be very difficult for a knife attacker to pursue if they can't see. Has anybody seen that YouTube video called, Faith is yelling at me. Rob, look at Slack. All right. Faith is yelling at me. 1 second. Has anybody seen the YouTube video called 21-foot rule? It's a knife attack video. I think it entered on I think it was supposed to be a joke, but it's actually pretty amazing. All right. So Faith is sending me some Slacks. Let's see what we've got. Oh, this is why. We've got some super chats. We got a super chat coming in that I missed. All right. So Faith is now saying that we got a super chat from Christopher Wiseman. I just was talking about that. Can you comment on the 21-foot rule for suspects with a knife versus a handgun and its use in police shooting defenses? So the 21-foot rule is this idea. I was just bringing that up as the super chat was coming in. How funny. 21-foot rule. So if you look this up, you will see that the 21-foot rule is sort of it's the idea that if a suspect is within 21 feet, that's enough time. Basically, you have to shoot. There's not enough time. The suspect can close the gap, that 21 feet, very, very quickly. And so basically, that's as much time as you have to draw your gun and aim it at somebody and pull the trigger. Because if they're within 21 feet, they can close the distance faster than you can pull the gun. So if they're further than 21 feet, then that's enough time for you to do something else. But if they're within that 21 feet, then you have to draw and shoot. And this guy from my viewing of the video was clearly within 21 feet. So here is the actual rule. Let me just kind of point this out for you here. So this is the 21-foot rule. You can see here, basically it's saying 21 is a measure of distance that related to the time it would take an officer to recognize a threat, draw a sidearm, and fire 2 rounds center mass against an attacker charging with a knife or other stabbing weapon. So this isn't sort of a formal law enforcement rule, I don't think, but an attacker with a knife could cover 21 feet in about 1.5 seconds. And I think we saw on YouTube. So if we go over and we look at 21-foot rule, there's a lot of information on this. You can see sort of how this works. And let's see here if we can get the good part of the video. So here they're going to be measuring out the 21 feet, and they're going to see if an officer can draw without getting hit by this attacker. So 21 feet right there. Boom. Okay, so see how quickly that it happens. So if you're outside of that, you should be able to do something, but you're basically getting stabbed at that point. So that's what they're talking about. And I think it's relevant here, right? I think it's relevant. They didn't have enough time to do much of anything else, unfortunately. So it's a great question. Thanks for bringing it up, and very serendipitous that I was gonna talk about that anyways. All right, let's see what else. Okay, I think RAS Illusion says I think it fair to say that cops are being asked to do way too much. So let's pull back what we asked them to do, write down what we asked them to do, and how to go about doing it. USA Libertarian says this is the problem when you don't have less lethal, then anything becomes lethal force justified. There's also a rule of threes. This comes from Rudy Rhodes. He says that 3 seconds, 3 yards, 3 shots is where most gunfights, conflicts take place. Something to look up for context. That's interesting. I've not heard of that one. The momentum will keep the knife guy moving forward. That comes from Silver Sharky. Non-lethal is an option in deadly force. It would be helpful. Susan says it would be helpful if the general public needs to be educated on police procedures during a shooting to explain why multiple shots, 22 feet rule, mass body legs, etc. Yeah. Bully X Blue says allegedly his mother called because he was having a mental health crisis. Christopher Wiseman says Mythbusters did a good episode and confirmed 19 to 21 feet lethality. Interesting. Yeah, I have not seen that episode. Yeah, but it makes sense to me. And I've actually sort of paced out 21 feet to see if I could close the distance. And it is interesting because it feels pretty far. 21 feet actually feels far if you pace that out. It's like, I don't know if I can get there in time before somebody draws a gun, but they can. And when I got my CCW, my concealed carry weapons permit, I did something to that effect. I kind of did some of those exercises. And it is surprising at how quickly somebody can actually close the distance. USA Libertarian says, what if you miss with the Glock? Then you would have been better off with someone pepper spraying him. Cops are terrible shots. They miss more than they hit. They use Glocks because they are simple. Scotch says the 3-yard rule is for self-defenders, not police. Interesting to know. Police shootings take place 3 times further than those of self-defenders, which is 7 to 10 yards. We have Sean Parkinson, who wants to overturn Roe versus Wade in the House. We have Paul Fun, who says a cop can blow you away if you're within 21 feet and have a knife on someone. You have multiple cops, pepper spray. Yeah, I mean, I could easily see here how, there are other less than lethal forms that could have been used. I understand there's a lot of that could have been done, but you have to just, think about yourself in that particular situation. And I think according to the rules, according to the standards that we actually reviewed from the Philadelphia Police Department, I think a lot of people would find that they were in compliance with the manual and the totality of the circumstances and their own guidelines. I think they followed those pretty well. And even the video we saw, they were backing up for 20 seconds to 25 seconds of the 30-second video. It's at Merck Tech says, Rob, it looked to me like the cop was waving for the others to get back so they weren't in the crossfire because he knew he was going to shoot. If that's the case, then maybe it was premeditated. So that's interesting. So I actually saw him waving as sort of his indication to like drop the gun. Like he's verbally yelling at somebody, but he's also pointing like drop it, drop the gun, drop it. And he didn't. But I can see your point. I just didn't watch the video that way. Interesting. Yeah, crossfire. You want people out of crossfire regardless. You don't want guns out pointing at other people. And I did notice that. I mean, it's a dangerous situation for those officers. Obviously, a dangerous situation for Wallace. But those officers also, as soon as those shootings took place, the mom threw something at them, and then they started to sort of get enveloped by other people in the area. And I think that they were in a dangerous situation as well. That could have gone bad very, very quickly. Sean Parkinson says cops have the right to protect themselves, which I agree with. Zulu Zeit says if I shot someone for many of a host of things that are considered deadly threats to a cop, I'd get crucified. That's probably true. Yeah, I mean cops certainly have a different standard than we do. Cops shoot themselves trying to kill friendly dogs. Yeah. GG says R&R, with regards to the Democrats removing 60 votes, this is true. But however, it's important to note the Republicans expanded that law onto the SCOTUS. Okay, so I may be mistaken about that. So GG, you must be talking about the filibuster rule that was sort of removed by Harry Reid. You're saying that the Republicans actually modified that and then exploited that. So thanks for the fact check on that. We have Ryland Davis says some cop in a self-defense case was convicted for shooting because he said he didn't know about the 21-foot rule. That's interesting. Jocko Willink says they should be training 20% of the time. We ask the police to do their job. Yeah, I agree with that. I don't see almost any police train. Well, we see a lot of police training, but think about how much time they get trained relative to say us as lawyers, right? We go to law school for 3 years. That's learning the basics of the law. Then we spend another lifetime practicing law to learn the law. And I'm a criminal defense attorney, and I've been practicing for 7 years now. And do you think that I have a total understanding of criminal law? Absolutely not. There's a lot that I don't know, but I do my best to educate myself and learn what I need to know for the specific case. And do cops do that? Is their 6-week program sufficient? And how many of them are training on all of these things as rigorously as we would expect them to? I don't think the standard is as high as we may want it to be, personally. You cannot be the aggressor and then claim to be engaged in self-defense. This has to apply to officers also. It comes from RAS Illusion. We have CKJ's cellmate says, why do people see ACB as such a threat? We have Zulu, we have TA, we got Pablo in the house. We got a lot of people here. We got some comments coming in that are getting a little bit held for review. All right. Well, listen, everybody, it is about that time. I want to wrap up here because we have some people coming in to do some stuff around the studio. I really appreciate you being here and being part of the program. One of the things I would love to ask of you is, because we cover this type of content, YouTube just likes to really slap that age restriction on us. So if you think these conversations are good, helpful, if we're providing some value, if we're helping to sort of dissect some issues, or just even, hosting a good conversation, do us a favor and share the show. Send it to your friends, send it to your non-friends, send it to your family. Just tell them, hey, this is a good spot to have conversations about these issues. That would really help us out, because we're trying to enlist more people in the cause of talking about these issues, and hopefully, leading to some sort of substantive change in our criminal justice system. That's what our mission is about here. So if you're not a regular on the channel, do us a favor, hit the subscribe button. We go live every day at 4 p.m. Arizona time, 7 p.m. Eastern time. And we're also in the process of getting ready for a mega stream for election night. That's right. We're going to be here from 4 till Lord knows when on that particular night, election night. That's 1 week from today, next Tuesday. So we want to make sure that you're subscribed and that you're going to be here. We might be live streaming for like 6 or 7 or 8 hours. Oh, I'm going to need a break, but it's going to be a lot of fun. So we want to have you here. So be sure to subscribe, share the show with your friends. And if you know anybody who's been charged with a crime in the state of Arizona, that's what my law firm does. We have an awesome team of people here. We help a lot of good people through the justice system and get their lives back on track. And we would be honored to help your referrals. So please send them our way if you know anybody. Other than that, my friends, have an awesome evening. Thank you so much for being here. I will see you back here, same time tomorrow. Have a great night. Bye-bye.